I'm always talking about trying to find points of connection, of shared values. And I have followed this guy for a long time. And so I just threw a feeler out. Hey, would you join me on the show? I know you're a believer, you're a Christian, but we have a lot in common. Can we talk? And he joins me here. Andrew Whitehead is Associate Professor of Sociology and Director of the Association of Religion Data Archives at the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Come on. You got to give me like a shorter intro, man.
I know. Yeah, that's a lot of words. But
it's impressive. I mean, how do you put that on a business card, Andrew?
I don't even carry him anymore.
Okay. In 2019, he authored an article called Make America Christian Again, Christian Nationalism and Voting for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. He's also author of a book that came out 3 years ago. It's called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. And he's got a brand new book. And the reason we're talking American Idolatry, How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. You do a lot of data collection about belief or professed belief in the United States. People go to church, they leave the church, the demographic tides are shifting, articles about politics, religion. And I want to get to that. But beyond, the data collection, can you sort of flesh out more about who you are? This is an introduction to my audience and a first-time handshake for many. Who are you, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a sociologist and I study religion in the U.S. And so, it's been a little while, I guess a little over a decade since I left graduate school. And so in that time, I mostly study broad surveys of the U.S. population. And so I'm fascinated with religion, especially in the U.S. context, how it both shapes and is shaped by our culture and demographic change, different types of socio-demographic change, and how that affects religion. And so that's really where my expertise on this subject begins. But then too, as an American who's interested in living in a democracy and power sharing, all of those things. And then too, identifying still as a Christian and having grown up in a particularly conservative Christian space, but then being on a journey, since, growing up in that space.
So would you say you deconstructed, at least to a degree? Like you said, you come out of kind of a fundy religion. Did you have to sort of re-examine, right? You come out of the cocoon and you're like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't my flavor of belief or value. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, no, I think, any Christian that is interested, and I think this is true for probably any world religion or for those that identify with no religious faith, we're all on a journey. And to, really think through why we believe what we believe, it's going to involve self-examination. And when you do that, there's going to be things that you find don't really work with how you view the world or want to view the world, or how you want to live within it. And so we set those aside. And so that happened with my faith journey that I'm still on and still, thinking through and wrestling with, particular aspects of it. And I think other folks do that as well. And so I think that's a part of just being honest. If we're going to be with whatever deeply held beliefs we hold, I think holding them in such a way that we try to have some humility that this is where I am right now. And I understand that we may not be in the same place or drastically different places, but that doesn't mean we can't, like you said, value the humanity that we see in each other.
Andrew, it's funny. I think you and I might hear the same thing. Some people say I sound sometimes like a preacher. You've got a little bit of a minister thing going on there.
Yeah.
You ever heard that one before? Like it's probably just being a teacher, communicator kind of thing.
I think
right?
so. Yeah. Doing a lot of teaching and podcasting, communicating. And then too, in funny ways where I don't know, how we try to label ourselves. It can be difficult for me sometimes to figure out, well, where do I really slot in? But I know that I was formed, in the evangelical Protestant tradition. And so no matter where I'm at, probably some of the cultural style, let's say, comes out, with that.
Maybe we do have echoes of that. You said that in your book, you said you used to listen to Christian music. Man, that's my wheelhouse. I was a Christian radio host for a lot of, like 10, 12 years.
Oh,
Come on,
nice.
give me some of the artists. I mean, not necessarily the new ones that I can't connect with, but give me the old school, some of the back in the day music. Who'd you listen to?
Yeah. So one that was really influential is Five Iron Frenzy. So, the ska wave we all lived through. But I think, their music still holds up. There are many that I didn't really like then and certainly don't like now, but Five Iron Frenzy, I think, holds up. And funny story, I was been working on a 4-part Christian Nationalism podcast, right? And so as I was working on it, the sound engineer is someone who didn't grow up with that music at all, but I had talked about, some influences and told him that band. So he went back and listened to it, and I was really pleased where he's like, I was fully expecting to listen to some of this music and be like, how horrible is this? But Five Iron held up. Like, he was like, it's pretty good. And so that was one. I was really into the, pop punk Christian scene too. So MXPX was a big one. Goaty Hook and some of those other smaller bands. But it was basically like if anybody knew about Cornerstone Festival in Illinois, that was where I was in the summer. Love that. So
those are kind of, I mean, if I may, they're kind of niche bands though. I mean, it wasn't like Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, White Hearts, Third Day, that kind of thing. You were a little hardcore. You were a little more niche, if I may. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, and we took pride in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I work for an alternative Christian station for about a year and a half, and I remember we used to play a lot of bands, and we were edgy, man. We were rocking for the rock kind of deal. So our paths have crossed in that way. Andrew, let's say that Jesus Christ exists. Let's say you and I agree on this, and Jesus, I don't know, he takes an Uber over the border from another place into the United States, and he looks around. Jesus looks around at the U.S. in the year 2023. What do you think he would have to say about everything that's been going on?
Oh, man, that is a huge question. And one that, too, I guess I want to preface, and this is something that I truly believe and try to get across in this most recent book, is that there are a number of expressions of Christianity. And so to say, that I would know exactly what Jesus, I think different expressions would highlight different things. But I think what I would want to do is encourage people to move towards one of those expressions of Christianity and those expressions of Jesus and his teachings, that moves away from Christian nationalism. So I think one of the things that, maybe a number of those expressions would say, Jesus would think, is looking at this close, intertwining of American identity with being truly, that's how you be a true Christian, right? So to be a real Christian, we've got to be American. And if you're going to be American, you've got to be a Christian of a particular type. So I think he would obviously have some issues with that. I think the wealth of our nation would obviously come up, and that includes, me in that. But then the treatment of those who are marginalized and oppressed, I think Jesus would have words to say on that. And I think that is something that, as I study Christian nationalism, is something that gets overlooked and I think actively ignored. And there's a lot of kind of examples that pop up, a culture that is obsessed with firearms. And, there's a picture a friend just sent me where it said, one nation under God, and then it had a skull with the American flag on it, and then 2 semi-automatic rifles crossed behind the skull. And so, thinking of this like interplay of violence and guns and God and all of that, I think he would be troubled by that. And so that among
I'm reminded of when there was a manufacturer of firearms for the U.S. military, and they were actually embossing scriptures on the weapon itself, which is weird. And aren't believers divinely protected? Aren't you divinely protected? So I don't know. I'll let you speak to that.
No, I think, a lot of it is kind of holding beliefs, and then how that actually gets lived out and the disconnect between some of those, right? And so these are some of the questions that I think caused me to have to leave or walk out of some of the aspects of the faith I was handed, where it's exactly that. If we believe that God protects us and that, there's our battle isn't against flesh and blood. This is another, verse that folks will use. Then why are we fighting wars, and why are we so easy to move into violence towards other people, both interpersonally or collectively? As we look at racial inequality too, so quick to ignore some of that inequality. And so, the divinely protected part, I think there are aspects where, for those outside the faith looking at it, it's like, well, that seems hypocritical, right? You say God will protect you, but then you're more than willing to take up arms or act out in violence towards others, no matter what. And so those are questions that I've had and that I have to wrestle with, and I hope other Christians wrestle with as we think about how to be Christian in relation with those who don't share the same beliefs as us. We have to find a way to live and work together towards a common future.
I've noticed that the depictions of Christ have sort of become a little more badass over like he's just more buff. Have you noticed that? Like we're in this sort of era of bravado, It's like watching the NFTs or whatever of Donald Trump, and and he's got a 6-pack and he's 7 feet tall and he's he's riding a tank and there's fire and eagles and stuff like that. And the Jesus of today seems to more and more be like that. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Let's talk about patriotism. Now, this is something that you deal with in the book, patriotism. And I want to get into your definition. Maybe we should start there. Define for me your take on patriotism.
Yeah, different writers, that work within political science or political theory will distinguish between nationalism and patriotism. And so I like when they distinguish patriotism as, love or feelings of care and warmth towards our fellow countrymen and women. So it's almost like when we watch the Olympics and we see somebody that I watch the Olympics and I don't know that person who's running the 800, in track and field. But I see that they're from the US. And so all of a sudden I care about them. I want to see them do well and win, but not at the detriment or to push down other nations, but just because we happen to be from the same country by historical accident. And so I think patriotism in that sense is care for those around us who have lived around us, and wanting to do better and do well by them, right? By looking at our history and seeing where we've had issues, how can we do it better going forward? And again, not at the detriment to people from other nations. This isn't something where we have to be over and above them, but how can we care for one another and those who are even outside our group in such a way that we aren't trying to marginalize or push down other folks. And so I think patriotism in that sense resonates with me, right? It's wanting to tell the truth about the group.
It does seem to be a zero-sum game for many people. For us to be winners, everybody else has to be a loser. For us all to succeed, we simply have to succeed more. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm also struck by the people who say we're the greatest country on the face of the earth, and yet they can't give you a single metric. Or I wrote about this in Fox News Christian a few years ago. I'm like, cost of living, no, we lose. Healthcare, no, we lose. Violence, murder rate, no. Lifespan. All of these. I mean, you're the sociologist. You've seen that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Across a number of different things. And I just saw today, actually, the life expectancy of the U.S. compared to other essentially wealthy, Western post-industrialized nations is much lower, right? And they've all taken a little dip because of what we've lived through with the global pandemic, but the U.S. is much further below other countries. And so when we look at that, I think that's where we should all be skeptical of anybody trying to say that, we have it figured out or the U.S. is number one. I think there's so much work that needs to be done and can be done to make it a place where, like you said, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, that there's enough for everyone if we're all committed to giving up, what we feel is our right to be on top.
I'm talking here with sociologist and author Dr. Andrew Whitehead. New book out called American Idolatry, How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and threatens the church. I'm interested in the symbols of patriotism. You can be the worst person in the world, but you put a flag out in your yard and you put the flag sticker on your car, or you're wearing the colors, red, white, or blue. Boom, you are now a great American, right? It's patriot plumage, I think. So there's a lot of flag waving, especially by the extreme right wing, by Christian nationalists. Let's talk about the symbols. What's your take?
Yeah, I think symbols are a key part of Christian nationalism, because as we study it, we define it as a cultural framework. And cultural frameworks there's many different types, but essentially they contain narratives and symbols and value systems and beliefs, and all those wrapped up together that help people make sense of their social worlds, like what things mean and what they should do, how they should act within it, who we are as a people or a country and where we're going. And so with Christian nationalism, it's a very powerful cultural framework filled with powerful symbols, whether it's red, white, and blue, different songs, different ritual holidays that we have throughout the year, and then Christian symbolism as well. And seeing those two intertwined can be really powerful. So as I don't know if this will come up later, but as we look at, let's say, January 6th, right, this brought a lot of Americans and woke, I think, a lot of Americans up, where they see the symbols of Christianity crossed with, or in relationship with, the Confederate flag, or symbols of QAnon and conspiratorial thinking, or nooses and other weapons of war or harm. And so they were really surprised. And so the symbols are so key and are such an important part of this, because they tell us something about ourselves. And a lot of times too, they motivate people to action, right? They see this is what we're all about and this is who we are. And those identities are really powerful.
Yeah, but I mean, and all right, I'll just go here. If you look at the Bible, if we read the Bible, it's loaded with militarized language. We are in God's army. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. When I was a kid, we used to march. We used to sing, "I'm in the Lord's army." We talk about the sword of the Spirit and the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation. We are going to battle. It's easy for me to see how some people could read those verses literally and say, you know what, it's war. It may be literal war. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think there are definitely American Christians, and two, it isn't even just Christianity, other world religions, or even just Christianity in the U.S., but other countries through Christianity's history, drawing on and using these symbols to essentially baptize violence and fear of others, and being able to go out and commit really heinous crimes, against whole people groups, whether we're talking about indigenous people that were on these shores before us, or enslaving Africans. All of these things were made possible through interpretations of the Bible and theologies that essentially said that, God is on your side and has a particular demand on you to go and take control and to flourish and take these resources, whether it's the doctrine of discovery or manifest destiny. All of these things were intertwined with theologies. And so I think some of the work that I need to continue to do, and other Christians too, is thinking through some of those theologies we were handed and where they come from. And are they truly things that we need to continue to carry going forward, or do we need to set those aside, and to see how closely they're intertwined with anti-Black racism or xenophobia or other types of isms that cause us to harm our neighbors. And so it's true that in the Bible, there's symbolism and words used that Christians throughout history have drawn on and interpret in such a way that allow them, and almost in some sense, they feel force them to act in very violent ways towards other human beings.
Yeah, but do you think that a benevolent deity would come down and say, you got it wrong? Like, everybody, you are interpreting these words incorrectly, or let me fix the words. I mean, do you feel like that an involved personal God would come in and intervene in some way?
That's a really good question. It's a fair question. It's one that I definitely struggle with and have to think through, in my personal life, stuff that I face, but then looking at all of the pain and suffering of the world. And I can say I wish that would happen. I wish it would be that straightforward and easy. And I don't know that I have a great answer on most days for that. That is one of the most difficult parts, right? Okay. Is thinking through that. And
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Andrew, but I mean, you and I are just talking over.
No, it's fair. It's totally fair. Like I totally empathize with that, and it's a completely fair question. And
all right. Well, while we're here, sort of talking about the faith itself, interesting line in your book. It said Jesus calls us to be a light, not a wildfire, and I think it's a great line. Now, being a former Christian, though, I was taught that God created Adam, and then one of the next things he did was to give Adam dominion over the entire earth. 1 Chronicles 29, all that is in heaven and in earth belongs to the Christian God. Psalm 22, he rules over the nations. Matthew 28 has the Great Commission, right? Go ye into all the world, and pretty much converts anybody. So it seems to me that the Christian dominionist, and I think the Christian nationalist is a dominionist. It seems like the Bible is a dominionist book. Would you agree, disagree, elaborate, refute?
Yeah. Well, I think there are definitely interpretations and expressions of Christianity that will highlight or foreground those types of verses, but in such a way that it becomes, quote unquote, we're interpreting it literally, and this is what it means to go and do. But I do think there are expressions of Christianity that wouldn't read those passages or interpret them in the same way, or wouldn't necessarily think that we have to go and take dominion or force others into anything, or even just focus on, quote unquote, saving those people. So I think that's part of it is recognizing too, at least for me in my journey, the various expressions of Christianity. And for me, moving towards some of those that don't demand others just fall in line, but are focused on a type of self-sacrifice that will hopefully help others find flourishing and the common good. And so I think there's a lot of variation within it. And those are the types of expressions of the Christian faith that I want to move towards, that I hope others move towards, and that I think help confront and oppose some of the dominionist aspects of Christian nationalism.
The book title, American Idolatry, you say Christian nationalism is idolatry. Explain that for me.
Yeah. So, within the Christian tradition, this idea of idols are anything that we place, Christians or others place their hope and trust in other than God. And so idols, we turn to these for protection and provision, but they require allegiance that costs us something. And so when we, go to these things other than God for protection and provision, it's going to lead us down paths that are going to be inherently self-centered and focused on protecting us to the detriment of others, I believe. And so I think Christian nationalism is idolatry, especially around this desire for power over other people, in such a way that we want to their detriment. Fear and threat, where we're, drawing up boundary lines against others and we're just afraid of them, even having conversations or working with them. And then violence to protect those boundaries and protect our access to self-centered power. And so, I'm writing to a Christian audience to try to say, when we turn towards these idols, right, we're turning away from what the Bible calls us to do, which is to trust in God and to leverage what we have to the benefit of those around us. Because Jesus, again, in various expressions of the Christian faith, was focused on siding with the marginalized and siding with those who are broken and being oppressed. And so, as I write this book to Christians, and even, for your listeners who aren't, maybe even resourcing them to be able to talk to the Christians they're near or they live life with or in their families, to use the resources of the Christian faith to show a way away from Christian nationalism. Because I do believe that there are expressions of Christianity that can live around and with and in harmony with those who don't share the same religious beliefs.
Have you noticed how often many of the people, especially, are those people busting into the Capitol on January 6th, that they're holding up Jesus? He's suspiciously white. Like,
Yes.
White Jesus. He's very American
Very
Jesus.
white.
Have you
Yes.
noticed that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's some really interesting, social scientific studies of how folks imagine Jesus, and the racialized aspect is very clear and has a lot of implications for how they see their social worlds.
Yeah, I think a lot of cultures. I did a presentation years ago called "The Changing Face of Jesus," and there's like a Native American Jesus, there's an Asian Jesus, there's an African American Jesus. It's interesting how Jesus seems to reflect. We want to look at Jesus and see ourselves. I don't know. Would you say it that way, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that's one of the real, not necessarily desires. It's not as though it's like this. Well, for some folks might be explicit, but I think for many people, as they just imagine a person that, obviously they would never have a picture of or know what it looks like, or even God in their mind, it's so easy to impute, right, what we see around us or what we value, the groups that we're a part of, to create, in some sense, and other writers have said this, right, create God in our image, to think that God looks like or values us. And the writer Anne Lamott has a great quote where, I'm going to get it wrong, but essentially what she's saying is, for a lot of folks, they look around and, if you've created God in your image, if God hates everybody that you hate. And so if God just completely agrees with you, the likelihood that you've created God in your image is pretty high. And I think a lot of American Christians have done that.
Well, you brought up kind of the dark side, the hate, the bigotry. Do you feel like you've mentioned white Christian nationalism?
Yeah.
Do you feel like the Christian nationalist movement in this country is a white power movement?
I think that there is overlap. So the Venn diagram, there's overlap. There are going to be white nationalists who, would embrace Christian nationalism, would talk in terms of saving. A lot of times they talk in terms of saving like Western civilization and Christendom, right? And so there's aspects of it. But I wouldn't say that many Americans that embrace Christian nationalism would actively or even implicitly embrace a lot of white nationalist viewpoints. But Christian nationalism in the U.S. is fundamentally racialized. And by that, I mean, it is this cultural framework operates in such a way that it perpetuates and sustains a society and social systems that tend to benefit white Americans as a group, right? And so it has less to do with the skin color of the person embracing it and more to do with the fact that it enforces and perpetuates whiteness, which again is a society that functions to benefit white people more and at the detriment to other racial and ethnic minorities. And so I think there's some overlap, but for most Americans who might embrace Christian nationalism, we do find over and over they're more likely to hold more racist views. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's broadly a white nationalist movement or that these folks are white nationalists.
Well, if we talk about MAGA, Make America Great Again, I always like to say, when were we great? Like,
yes,
what is it you want to return to, right?
Yeah.
And usually, I have found, and you tell me what your experience has been, it's usually mid-20th century, right? Things were, everything on TV was sort of homogenized and sanitized, and, everything was amazing and pure, and, everybody had greater morals. And of course, you do a cursory look at the mid 20th century and you're like, well, wait a minute. We had, white and colored water fountains and women weren't welcome in the workplace and kids are ducking under desks for nuclear bomb drills. And, I just think, whoa, wait a minute. So when you hear the good old days, the myth of the good old days, what comes to mind? I know you wrote about it. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key questions that we should be asking each other, continually asking ourselves is, anytime we want to kind of embrace or uplift nostalgia or thinking that, oh, it was better when, the key question is asked, well, better for who, right? And which groups? And so, as we look at Make America Great Again, and many of those folks are thinking of the 1950s. It was a pretty good time for white Americans, but especially those that were, upper working class or middle class especially. But then, like you said, when we look at that time, it was a time of segregation and Jim Crow and lynching and sundown towns. And there were higher rates of, in some quarters, substance abuse, and domestic violence was kind of hidden, but was prevalent. And so there's all these aspects where it might have looked good to some, or at least on the surface. There's a lot of suffering too. And so we have to think, well, why would we want to return to that? Or what was so great about that? And I think some of the nostalgia is just a fabricated history and past, right? Where we think, well, this was a time that was good for everyone, but it wasn't. And something I try to tell my students or show them consistently is how much of an outlier decade the 1950s was, especially economically, right? We're coming out of World War II and manufacturing is booming, and you could support a family on one income with, nothing more than a high school education, and folks did really well and had a pension and all those things. Again, not every American. But I think some of that is where folks think that was widespread. But before that decade, and especially after, that has just not been the reality for Americans. And so to want to return to some period and have a nostalgia for it that we can't recreate and is never coming back is truly unhelpful. And I think in that way, it serves to motivate folks to vote a particular way, but in reality, it's just nothing that's ever going to come again.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to a time when interracial marriage was illegal? And, if
Right.
your teenage daughter became pregnant, they send her away, kind of shun her off to a school for unwed girls and blah, blah, blah. And I just think, what exactly was great about that particular moment in our history? In the book, you talk a lot about the fearmongers, and I appreciate that because we talk about the power of the weaponization of fear language.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to throw some stuff out here and I'm just going to let you respond to it. Okay.
Yeah.
The fearmongers, usually white Christian nationalists, say those seculars or the other religions or whatever, the atheists, the evil people, they have taken God and prayer out of our schools. This is what they say. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, they haven't. First of all, like if we're talking about they, I would want to know who they is. But prayer is still allowed in school. Students can pray however much they want and lead prayers. All that we ask is that adults and teachers employed there aren't leading prayers or asking students to join them in prayer, and so yeah, it isn't as though God's not allowed in school. God is in schools.
Okay. It's moral chaos, Andrew. It's great. We have to return to Judeo-Christian values. I hear this one a lot. How do you respond to that term, Judeo-Christian values?
Yeah, well, this is another one where those terms, we really need to be clear of what that means. And a lot of times that's used to only refer to a very particular expression of Christianity. Because, again, they wouldn't want any sort of, for instance, progressive Christian values to be a part of the discussion of overturning wealth, or Christians that would say we need to operate according to a different economic system. They wouldn't want that. So it's a very particular expression of Christianity. So it isn't this broad, widely held belief or understanding of Christianity. It's one that they've defined in very particular ways, and in that sense, to benefit a very particular group, which is generally white Christians and natural born citizens. And so I think that's what needs to be made clear, is that this isn't the only representation of Christianity. There are many different expressions, but this is only a very particular one that wants the privilege and power. And so Kevin Kruse, in his book, One Nation Under God, has a great chapter where, they're talking about wanting to get the Bible, quote unquote, back in schools. And the big question is, and that these Christians that wanted to put Bible back in schools couldn't agree on, is which Bible, right? So you ask, well, which translation? And all of a sudden, you'll have Christians disagreeing with one another. Or put prayer back in schools. Well, which prayer? And all of a sudden, they're all going to be disagreeing. And so I think that shows the inherent weakness of thinking that there's some monolith of Judeo-Christian values, because Christians themselves differ on a lot of these things.
Oh, man, you and I'm telling you, I just want to, when we talk about expressions of the faith and all the things that people are confused about, I'm just waiting for the curtain of the sky to open and the great clarifier to show up and just solve the mystery. Because right now, if I ask an expert in Christianity about anything, literal creation, how do you baptize, what's the nature of heaven and hell, all those things. Do you get the Holy Spirit at salvation? Is that a separate prayer? Miracles, speaking in tongues, blah, blah. The end times, it's Thunderdome, Andrew.
Yeah, totally.
And the fact that even the experts can't agree is extremely frustrating for someone like me.
That makes sense.
That's understandable, right? That's a reasonable frustration.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I think in some ways that points to this idea or belief that somehow we have it settled and can now, shape and bring that out and everybody needs to fall in line with it. I think should raise some humility and some hopefully taking a step back, right? And taking a beat, because there's a lot that we can agree on. And two, something that you mentioned earlier, and I thought maybe we would go here, but as Christians want to run the world, as we look at some influential denominations, they can't even really run their congregations well, and when we look at the abuse crisis. So in that sense, I'm like, there's the whole kind of parable or saying of Jesus, the, speck someone else's eye and the log in your own eye. I think I would want Christians to kind of embrace a little bit more humility in that there's a lot of things we differ on. And, we have a lot of problems internally too, that to think that we now can go out and just easily take control and do whatever we want, I think for many reasons, but especially for this one, is a bit problematic.
Yeah, do we really want the Southern Baptist Convention running the rest of the world right now? Probably not. Probably not. A couple more of this is right out of Fox News as far as scaring people. The immigrants. Oh, what a great scapegoat, right? Especially on the southern border. We're not too worried about the Canadians. They're busy curling and watching hockey and all that stuff, right? But southern border, they're coming. I've heard. I was raised hearing this. They're coming for your jobs. They're coming for your money, for your opportunity, for your children. How do you address this sort of othering of everybody else, especially those outside our national border lines?
Yeah, well, I think one thing, that I try to write in the book is that immigration, especially in a nation this large and this complex, is an incredibly complex issue. And to think that we can just turn to the Bible or a couple verses to figure out all the policy that we need to help our nation function and take in those that are either fleeing here as refugees or coming here as immigrants, I think is an exercise in futility. But I do think there are fundamental values that Christians could use as we think about those in need, and immigrants and refugees are those in need, to think through how we treat them, how we talk about them. And I think one of the really, really sad aspects is, religious leaders with a lot of sway and a lot of pull and a lot of followers really embracing this demonizing language towards those in need, whether it's immigrants or refugees, to the fact that when we gather data, Americans that embrace Christian nationalism, they're even less likely to want to admit refugees who come from majority Christian nations, who are probably have a greater likelihood of being Christian than their fellow Americans. But it has little to do with any shared religious faith and everything to do with the fact that they are being identified as other, right? Outside, American identity and who is actually American and that's racialized as well. And so all those aspects, I think, should be troubling to Christians. And I hope increasingly it is. But like you said, the voices that kind of embrace this rhetoric are really loud and really powerful. And I think that makes it really difficult.
You've been very generous with your time. I'm going to link the book in the description box. But before we go, the increasing amount of, violent language, I don't even know if they're dog whistles anymore. They seem to be more and more overtly saying, we want to brutalize our enemies. Yeah. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you. I worry that all it takes is one spark, and it's bullets in the streets, a jihad in this country, especially going into 2024. Has your research spoken to this, and tell me about what the book has to say about this sort of rising tide of jihad?
Yeah, well, violence, I think, empirically we see, and as I talk about in the book, is a key element of Christian nationalism, and a comfort with authoritarian rules and rulers that, under the threat of violence or through violence, will, in their hope, restore order according to this moral hierarchy that they believe should be enacted. And so we do see evidence of a greater acceptance of political violence if folks feel that the democratic process or an election didn't turn out the way that they wanted. Americans that strongly embrace Christian nationalism are more likely to see political violence as an acceptable outlet for that. And we also see too, a redefinition of what we saw on January 6th, where Americans that strongly embrace Christian nationalism are more likely to say that those folks shouldn't be caught and prosecuted.
All right, I'm going to finish with kind of a freshman college term paper question here. Forgive me. But what is what's one of the most surprising things that you discovered in writing the book? I mean, I know when you were doing your research, you probably had some eureka moments, but I mean, what did you learn yourself on your journey through Christian nationalism in the book?
Yeah, I think really the big thing that I learned is that exact word is journey. So as I kind of weave in some of my personal journey, throughout the past couple of decades of growing up in a very conservative religious community, to now wrestling with Christian nationalism. And even since I finished the book, and obviously there's this big lag before it appears and then it appears, just recognizing the journey that I'm still on, and that others are on. And so while it can be at times frustrating where, we would hope others might see what we see as the truth really quickly and easily, I think I'm trying to have empathy for those wherever they're at on the journey, raising questions and issues to them and allowing them time to wrestle with it and begin the journey wherever they're at. Because I know that I still have more to learn. And there are folks, in the community that you're coming from, or, your listeners are in, that have helped me see where I can do better. Right. And for those that have empathy with me, that I'm hopefully learning and doing better. And then for me with others, or for them with those that they're around, I think, recognizing that it's a journey, that it isn't a straight line, that it does take time. It can be difficult. It can be frustrating. But I think that's one thing that I've learned. And I guess it too is a note of, my hope as we go forward, is that we continue to challenge each other, but recognize that folks are on the journey, and it does take time.
I like the I came out of a type of activism where I was going hard all the time at every flavor of Christian, and I got nowhere, and I was frustrated, and I found that I was unnecessarily dividing much more than I was uniting. I mean, it's some people still blanch when I say that I'm more interested in your values than beliefs, although your values can inform your beliefs. But I mean, you're someone who you want to share this world, right? There's room in the world for you and for me and people across the color and culture spectrum. Yeah. As long as you're not trying to strip me of my rights and equality and humanity, maybe there's room on the planet for all of us, right? Andrew?
Yeah. That's my hope, and that's my belief. And it doesn't mean that it'll be easy or straightforward, but I do hope that, those values of shared humanity, and in our country, a democracy where voices are heard, we have a seat at the table. I think those are the things that I hope we can rally around and confront those forces that want to take that away, and hopefully finding a shared future together.
Well, it's been an honor to have you on the show, and honestly, I hope I get a chance to shake your hand in person one of these days, because I do. I follow your. Do you still? Still call it Twitter. Do you call it? I don't call it X. Hey, I know I said we're done, but do you struggle with whether to stay on?
I do. I really do.
Because part of me is like, I just can't anymore. But then I don't want to abandon the platform.
Yeah. I'm the
I
same
don't know.
way.
You have that argument with yourself?
Yeah, there's
Andrew?
folks there I still connect with, and the voices I want to be connected to and hear and learn from.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to figure out an exit strategy with Substack and other
Blue
social
Sky,
media
and,
efforts.
and there's Threads, and I'm waiting for a dominant platform to, if one ever emerges. I don't know. I've been watching. Anyway, forgive me. Dr. Andrew Whitehead, he is author of the new book, American Idolatry, How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. You're terrific. Thanks for talking to me, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for the time. I do really appreciate the conversation. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully our paths crossing in the future.